I heard my father's announcement at 7:42 p.m. on Christmas Eve. I've made my decision about the business succession. The company will go to Bradley, not David. The entire room nodded in agreement like it was the most obvious thing in the world. My name is David. I'm 45 years old and I've worked at Hartwell Manufacturing for 23 years, longer than anyone else in the room except my father. I started in the warehouse at 22, worked my way through every department, learned every machine, every process, every inefficiency that could kill a deal or save the company money. Bradley Mitchell was 34, Harvard MBA, married to my sister Sarah for 3 years. He'd been a consulting on our operations for 18 months, implementing what he called modern business practices and strategic optimization. The family saw a sharp-dressed professional with an impressive resume. I saw a man who'd never spent a day on a factory floor trying to run a manufacturing company, like it was a tech startup. It makes perfect sense, my Aunt Margaret said, raising her wine glass. Bradley understands modern business. He'll take the company into the future. Absolutely, added Uncle Richard. David's a good worker, but this business needs fresh thinking, not more of the same old-fashioned methods. I smiled and lifted my own glass. You're right, Bradley deserves it. He's worked hard for this opportunity. What nobody in that room knew was that I'd been buying their shares for 2 years. The favoritism started early. Sarah was born when I was 12, and from day one, she was the golden child. Beautiful, charming, everything came easy to her. While I was working summers in the factory, learning the business from the ground up, Sarah was taking dance lessons and piano lessons and getting straight A's in private school. When she graduated from college with a communications degree, Dad immediately found her a job in our marketing department. When I suggested we needed better inventory management systems after working in the warehouse for 5 years, Dad told me to focus on what you know best, moving boxes. When Sarah married Bradley, it was like Dad had finally gotten the son he'd always wanted. Bradley arrived with his MBA and his consultant vocabulary, talking about synergies and operational efficiency and market penetration strategies. Dad ate it up. Finally, he told me after Bradley's first month. Someone who understands that this business needs to evolve beyond your grandfather's way of doing things. I'd tried to evolve the business for 20 years. Every suggestion I made was dismissed as small thinking or not strategic enough. But when Bradley suggested the exact same improvements using business school terminology, they became innovative solutions. 2 years ago, I proposed upgrading our warehouse management system. I'd researched the technology, calculated the ROI, identified the specific inefficiencies it would solve. Dad's response? David, you're thinking like a warehouse worker, not a business owner. We need big picture thinking, not tweaks to operations. 6 months later, Bradley proposed implementing advanced logistics optimization technology. Same system, same benefits, wrapped in MBA language. Dad approved a $300,000 budget immediately. That's when I realized I was never going to get credit for understanding this business better than anyone else in the family. But I also realized something else. Several family members were getting tired of Bradley's innovations. Bradley's first major initiative was workforce optimization. He analyzed our payroll and identified redundancies and inefficiencies in our staffing model. What he actually did was fire 3 guys who'd been with the company for over 15 years. Men who knew how to keep our temperamental machinery running, who understood the quirks of our production process, who could solve problems that weren't in any manual. We're reducing our labor costs by 12%, Bradley announced at the monthly family meeting. Plus, we're eliminating institutional resistance to change. Within 2 months, our defect rate increased by 18%. Machine downtime doubled. Orders started shipping late because the new guys didn't understand the production sequence. I kept quiet, documenting everything, watching Bradley blame the problems on temporary adjustment periods and legacy system limitations. The second initiative was vendor relationship optimization. Bradley decided our long-term suppliers were charging us too much, that we could save money by bidding out contracts to more competitive providers. I'd worked with our steel supplier Morrison Industries for 12 years. They'd helped us through the 2008 recession by extending payment terms when cash was tight. They delivered quality materials on time, and their metallurgist, Frank Morrison, personally inspected every shipment for our most demanding customers. Bradley replaced them with a company that bid 8% lower. The savings looked great on paper. In reality, their steel had consistency issues that caused production delays, their delivery schedule was unreliable, and they had no technical support when we encountered problems. We're achieving significant cost reductions in our materials procurement, Bradley reported to the board. This demonstrates the value of data-driven decision-making versus relationship-based purchasing. Our customer complaints increased by 23%. Two major clients started asking questions about quality control. One aerospace contractor put us on vendor review status after receiving parts that didn't meet specification. I kept documenting every delayed shipment, every customer complaint, every problem that could be traced back to Bradley's optimizations. I also started having quiet conversations with family members who owned shares in the company. Uncle Richard owned 8% of the company stock. He'd inherited it from my grandfather, but had never been involved in operations. After 18 months of Bradley's management, Uncle Richard was asking uncomfortable questions about why the quarterly distributions were getting smaller. I don't understand all the business terminology, he told me over coffee. But the checks keep getting smaller, and Bradley keeps talking about necessary investments and strategic repositioning. What's your read on all this? Honestly, Uncle Richard, I think Bradley's making some decisions that look good in presentations, but hurt our actual performance. Our costs are up, our quality is down, and our customers are getting frustrated. But your father seems confident in Bradley's direction. Dad wants to believe Bradley knows what he's doing, and maybe he does in some businesses. But manufacturing is different. You can't optimize relationships and institutional knowledge out of existence. Uncle Richard was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about simplifying my portfolio, getting out of some investments that require more attention than I want to give them. If you ever want to sell your shares, I'd be interested. I believe in this company's potential, and I think I understand how to unlock it better than anyone else. 2 weeks later, I bought Uncle Richard's 8% stake for $240,000. Fair market value, no family discount, handled through attorneys to make sure everything was clean and legal. Over the next 18 months, I had similar conversations with other family members. Aunt Margaret owned 6% and was frustrated that her suggestions about employee benefits were being dismissed by Bradley's data-driven management approach. Cousin Mike owned 4% and was tired of quarterly meetings where Bradley presented complicated charts that didn't seem to correlate with actual business results. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Family members who'd once been proud of their ownership stake were becoming frustrated with declining performance and Bradley's condescending attitude toward their concerns. They wanted to cash out while the company still had value. I bought Margaret's 6% for $180,000, Mike's 4% for $120,000, Cousin Lisa's 3% for $90,000, my great-uncle Frank's 2% for $60,000. Each transaction was handled professionally, with proper documentation and legal review. By Christmas Eve, I owned 23% of Hartwell Manufacturing. Combined with my original 5% inheritance from my grandfather, I held 28% of the company. Dad still held 35%, Sarah had 15%, and Bradley had been given 10% as part of his compensation package. The remaining 12% was split between a few other relatives who weren't interested in selling. What Dad didn't know was that I'd also negotiated agreements with 3 of the remaining small shareholders to vote with me on major decisions. Effectively, I controlled 34% of the voting shares, 1 percentage point less than Dad's stake, but enough to block any major decisions I disagreed with. More importantly, I'd been studying our corporate bylaws and shareholder agreements. The company had been structured as a family corporation with specific succession rules. Any transfer of controlling interest required approval by a majority of shareholders. Dad assumed his 35% stake, combined with Sarah's 15% and Bradley's 10%, gave him control. But if I could get 1 more percentage point, or if I could convince Sarah that Bradley was destroying the company, Christmas Eve dinner was held at Dad's house, same as every year. The whole family was there. Parents, Sarah and Bradley, Uncle Richard, Aunt Margaret, the cousins. Everyone gathered around the massive dining table that had been my grandmother's pride and joy. After dessert, Dad stood up with his traditional Christmas announcement. Usually it was something about holiday bonuses or next year's vacation schedule. This year was different. I want to talk about the future of Hartwell Manufacturing, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built a company from his father's small machine shop into a $15 million operation. I'm 68 years old. It's time to start thinking about succession planning. The room got quiet. Everyone knew this conversation was coming eventually, but Dad had always deflected questions about retirement. I've watched Bradley's leadership over the past 18 months, Dad continued. His vision for modernizing our operations, his understanding of contemporary business practices, his strategic thinking. These are the skills this company needs to compete in the next decade. I kept my expression neutral, sipping my wine, watching Bradley's face. He was trying to look humble, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. Sarah has also shown tremendous growth in her role, Dad said. Her marketing initiatives and her support for Bradley's operational improvements demonstrate the kind of forward-thinking leadership this family business needs. Aunt Margaret nodded approvingly. Uncle Richard was studying his hands, probably thinking about the $240,000 check I'd written him 6 months ago. Therefore, Dad said, I've decided to transfer operational control of Hartwell Manufacturing to Bradley, effective January 1st. Sarah will become Vice President of Strategic Development. Together, they'll lead the company into its next phase of growth. The room erupted in congratulations. Sarah hugged Dad, tears in her eyes. Bradley stood up and shook Dad's hand with the firm grip he'd probably practiced in business school. This is wonderful, Aunt Margaret said. Bradley's exactly what the company needs. Absolutely, added Uncle Richard, avoiding my eyes. Fresh perspective, modern methods. Dad looked at me. David, I know you might have expected things to go differently, but I hope you understand that this decision is about what's best for the company's future. I smiled and raised my glass. Congratulations, Bradley. You've worked hard for this opportunity, and you deserve it. Thank you, David, Bradley said. I want you to know that your experience and institutional knowledge will be valuable as we implement our growth strategy. There will always be a place for you in the organization. How generous, a place for me in my own family's company. I'd like to make a toast, I said, standing up. To Bradley and Sarah. May they lead Hartwell Manufacturing to new heights of success. Everyone drank. Bradley looked pleased with himself. Dad looked proud of his decision. Sarah looked excited about her new role. None of them had any idea what was coming. The next morning, I called my attorney, James Morrison. No relation to Frank Morrison at the steel company, but equally reliable when it came to precision and attention to detail. Jim, I need you to prepare documentation for a shareholder meeting. I want to call an emergency session to review the corporate bylaws regarding succession and operational control. David, are you sure about this? Your father's announcement seemed pretty definitive. My father announced his intentions, but the corporate structure requires shareholder approval for any transfer of operational control. I want to make sure the board of directors understands their fiduciary responsibility to review this decision. What's your position? I own 28% of the company directly, plus voting agreements with holders of another 6%. I represent 34% of the shareholders, and I have serious concerns about the proposed leadership transition. On what grounds? I pulled out the folder I'd been maintaining for 18 months. Performance data, customer satisfaction metrics, financial analysis, quality control reports. I have documentation showing that Bradley's modernization initiatives have cost the company approximately $1.2 million in lost revenue, increased costs, and customer remediation. Jesus, David, you've been building a case. I've been doing my job. Someone needs to look out for the company's interests, and it's obviously not going to be my father. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for January 15th. I spent 2 weeks preparing my presentation, gathering supporting documentation, and making sure every number was bulletproof. I also spent time talking to our employees, the ones who were left after Bradley's workforce optimization. Frank Muller had been our head machinist for 19 years. He'd started as an apprentice the same year I began working in the warehouse. David, I gotta tell you, Frank said, things ain't the same around here. See, we used to take pride in our work, used to solve problems before they became problems. Now everything's got to go through committees and approval processes. By the time we get permission to fix something, the customer's already pissed off. What would you change if you could? First thing, bring back the morning production meetings. We used to start every day with the floor supervisors talking through the schedule, identifying potential problems, making sure everyone knew what needed priority attention. Bradley eliminated those meetings because they weren't efficient. Now we spend twice as much time fixing problems that could have been prevented. Anything else? The quality control protocols. Your grandfather instituted a system where every batch got inspected by someone who'd been here at least 5 years. Someone who knew what to look for, who understood how the materials should look and feel and smell. Bradley replaced that with statistical sampling and automated testing. Saves money on labor, but We're catching defects after they're already in customer hands instead of before they leave our facility. I documented everything. Every suggestion, every problem, every solution that had been dismissed as not cost-effective or not scalable. The conference room was packed on January 15th. Dad, Sarah, Bradley, the 3 independent board members we'd added when the company reached $10 million in revenue, and all the family shareholders. Even Uncle Richard was there, looking uncomfortable. Dad called the meeting to order. I understand David has requested this emergency session to discuss the succession planning announcement. David, you have the floor. I stood up, connected my laptop to the projector, and opened my presentation. Thank you. I've called this meeting because I believe the proposed leadership transition is not in the best interests of Hartwell Manufacturing or its shareholders. Bradley leaned forward. David, I respect your passion for the company, but the board has already reviewed my strategic plan. The board has reviewed your projections, I interrupted. They haven't seen the actual results of your initiatives over the past 18 months. I clicked to my first slide, a graph showing customer satisfaction scores from 2019 to present. Customer satisfaction has declined 31% since Bradley began implementing his optimization strategies. We've lost 2 major accounts and received formal complaints from 6 others. Bradley's face reddened. Those are temporary adjustment periods. Any major change involves short-term challenges. 18 months isn't temporary, I said, clicking to the next slide. Operating costs have increased 23%, while productivity has declined 16%. The workforce optimization eliminated experienced workers who understood our processes, and the vendor relationship optimization replaced reliable suppliers with cheaper alternatives that deliver inferior materials. I spent the next 20 minutes walking through the data. Every metric told the same story. Bradley's modernization was destroying the company's performance. The numbers were undeniable. Furthermore, I continued, I've identified several improvement opportunities that were dismissed without proper evaluation. I clicked to a slide showing my warehouse management proposal from 2 years ago. This system would have reduced inventory cost by $180,000 annually and improved order fulfillment accuracy by 94%. The proposal was rejected as not strategic enough. Click. This quality control enhancement would have prevented the defects that cost us the aerospace contract. Rejected as not cost-effective. Click. This employee incentive program would have retained the experienced workers we lost to workforce optimization. Rejected as not aligned with modern HR practices. The room was silent. Dad's face was getting redder with each slide. Sarah looked confused. Bradley was staring at the table. In conclusion, I said, I believe Hartwell Manufacturing needs leadership that understands manufacturing, not just management theory. Leadership that values relationships with customers and employees, not just cost reduction. Leadership that has actually worked in this business, not just studied business in school. Dad stood up. David, this is inappropriate. We've already made our decision. Actually, I said, wait, we haven't. Because I need to disclose something to the board. I pulled out a folder of legal documents. Over the past 2 years, I've acquired additional ownership stakes in Hartwell Manufacturing. I now own 28% of the company directly, plus voting agreements representing another 6%. As a 34% shareholder, I'm requesting a formal vote on the proposed succession plan. The room exploded. Dad was shouting about family betrayal. Sarah was demanding to know who had sold me their shares. Bradley was asking his attorney about the legality of my share acquisitions. James Morrison, my attorney, stood up. All share transfers were conducted legally with proper documentation and fair market valuations. David has every right to call for a shareholder vote on any major corporate decision. One of the independent board members, Patricia Collins, raised her hand. Given the performance data presented and the shareholder ownership situation, I think we need to table the succession plan pending further review. I agree, said board member Thomas Chen. This requires more analysis. Dad looked around the room, realizing that his announcement had just become a contested decision. Fine, we'll vote. All in favor of the proposed succession plan? Dad's hand went up. Sarah's hand went up. Bradley raised his own hand. Opposed? My hand went up. Patricia Collins' hand went up. Thomas Chen's hand went up. Uncle Richard, after a long pause, raised his hand. The vote was tied 4-4. Abstentions? Dad asked. Board member Michael Torres, who'd been quiet throughout the presentation, finally spoke. I need more time to review the performance data before making a decision. I move to postpone implementation of the succession plan pending a comprehensive operational review. Patricia Collins seconded the motion. It passed 5-3. 6 weeks later, after an independent business consultant had reviewed 18 months of operational data, the board voted 6-2 to reject Bradley's succession and install me as chief operating officer. The consultant's report was damning. Every metric I'd presented was confirmed. More importantly, she'd interviewed customers, suppliers, and employees to understand the full impact of Bradley's changes. The proposed leadership transition would likely result in further deterioration of customer relationships and operational efficiency. Her report concluded, David Thompson demonstrates superior understanding of the company's operations and has presented viable solutions to current performance challenges. My first act as COO was implementing the warehouse management system I'd proposed 2 years earlier. Installation took 6 weeks. Within 3 months, we'd reduced inventory cost by $195,000 and improved order accuracy to 99.2%. My second act was rebuilding relationships with our original suppliers. Frank Morrison at Morrison Industries was skeptical at first. Bradley had burned that bridge pretty thoroughly. But Frank had known me for 12 years, and he understood that I valued quality and reliability over short-term cost savings. David, I'll work with you again because I know you understand this business, Frank told me. But if that MBA starts making decisions about my contracts, we're done permanently. Within 6 months, our customer satisfaction scores had returned to 2019 levels. Within a year, we'd won back both major accounts we'd lost and added 3 new customers who'd heard about our improved reliability. The employee incentive program I'd designed brought back 2 of the experienced workers Bradley had fired and reduced turnover by 73%. The quality control enhancements eliminated customer complaints entirely. By the end of my first year as COO, Hartwell Manufacturing had its most profitable year in company history. Revenue increased 18%, costs decreased to 12%, and customer satisfaction reached an all-time high. Dad grudgingly admitted I'd exceeded expectations. Sarah found a new job at a marketing firm where her communications degree was more relevant. Bradley left to start his own consulting company, where he could optimize other people's businesses without dealing with the messy realities of actually running them. Uncle Richard sent me a note. Best $240,000 I ever invested. You saved the company. At the next Christmas dinner, Dad stood up for his annual announcement. I want to talk about the future of Hartwell Manufacturing, he said, looking directly at me. This year has proven that the best leadership for this company is someone who understands every aspect of the business, who values our relationships with customers and employees, and who has the vision to modernize without losing what makes us successful. He paused, smiled, and raised his glass. To David, who has shown that sometimes the best ideas come from the factory floor, not the corner office, I smiled back, thinking about the 23 years I'd spent learning this business from the ground up, the 2 years I'd spent methodically building my ownership position, and the satisfaction of finally being recognized for understanding the company better than anyone else in the family. Sometimes the best revenge is just being right. And sometimes being right requires patience, preparation, and the willingness to bet everything on your own competence. The business my grandfather started, that my father built, and that Bradley nearly destroyed, was finally in the hands of someone who understood that relationships, quality, and institutional knowledge aren't costs to be optimized. They're assets to be protected. And now I owned 28% of those assets with a performance record to prove I knew how to make them grow. Subscribe.